Hey guys, welcome to my pumpkin watercolor. It is October and I think this is the absolute best time to be sharing how to paint a little pumpkin. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna start with a pencil to sketch out the basic shape, because I don't know about you guys, but for me, if I just start trying to sketch anything when it comes to round, it ends up looking like a weird egg if I don't sketch it out first. So we're gonna start with, I have right here is a 9x12, and the watercolor paper I use, this is just a really basic watercolor, and I'll link it on the description below so you guys can get it. But it was like $5 or $6 for a whole pad of paper, and I like this watercolor paper. This is obviously not what I use if I'm doing something for a client, but it is great to practice on, and it just really holds a water well considering the price, so you can't really beat it. The paints that I use, I am a huge fan of Dr. P.H. Martin's a watercolor. It's concentrated watercolors, and he has several sets. I have been able to create every color I need from this, and then I have the one that's missing, that's the white. In any kind of paint, you go through white a lot. So I have a larger white. And the only color that I don't have in here, so the brown that this one has is a little bit of a mahogany color to it. So I have went out and I have purchased, I mean, I have a lot of different watercolors, but to get started, I have the sepia, I have also burnt umber, and then I have sap green. The reason why I bought these colors is because to make them, you use a lot of these colors, and I just felt like it was more economical to purchase these. But I will link all this in the bottom so that you guys can definitely pick some up if you want. And then I use, my favorite brushes for watercolor are always going to be the mop brushes. But I have to say, I have been getting the snap brushes lately, and I'm a big fan of them for detail work. So these are probably the brushes I use the most. Where is my big snap brush? Here it is. It's not white. These used to be such a pretty white. It used to be like that color white. Now they're just stained, and I try to clean them, but they don't get clean. So these are the snap brushes, and you can see on here it says snap. And these are made by Princeton, and Princeton is kind of the Rolls Royce of brushes. So these are the Princeton snap brushes on the right here, and then these are, I have a mix of Dugato and the Princeton brushes and the mop brushes here. And then these brushes, first of all, I think they're really pretty. They just remind me of something from like the 19th century, but they're the Princeton mop brushes, and don't they just look like, I mean, it's like your own little muse in a brush. It's amazing. And the reviews on this on Amazon are pretty hilarious. Like, people really go out and they're funny. If you're bored and you need a good read the reviews on the Princeton mop brushes. So these are my two go-to brushes sets. This is for detail. So when I'm doing my home portraits, I'm using these because I really want those straight lines. Everything else, I use these brushes. And your snap brushes are cheaper than these. If you want to get started with one, I would get started with the size 1 or the size 2. And they're made from squirrel hair. You can see right there. And they're made from squirrel hair. These are the perfect sizes because when they get wet, I'm going to get wet now too. And my brushes have been beat up, but it does form a nice little point. And then I have a smaller one. Let me grab that. So here's the smaller size. And that's a size 0. And this really gets into a nice little point. And that's all you need for brushes. I would say instead of getting like a set of brushes, maybe get these two sizes, a 0-2. And these are the Dugato squirrel hair. If you want to get the Princeton, you can. It's a little bit more money. I use this quite a bit. You can tell they've been through the ringer with me. So definitely pick those up. And I know that this is the, I don't know how to pronounce this, Dainayw, D-A-I-N-A-Y-W, the whole set for this one. And they work just as well. The whole set was pretty cheap. I think I got the whole set for like less than 30 bucks. So it's, I'm gonna say it was 3 brushes. I think it's these 3. There might have been a 4th. No, I'm pretty sure that's the 3. So you can get these 3 brushes for less than $30. So hopefully that gets you started. And then obviously you need water for watercolor and a palette. And you know, if you have the old school palettes, I call them old school. They're not old school. I mean, it's what people still use. If you have a regular palette, you can use those too. And I'm going to show you really quick. So here's a palette. The tins. Now to make these work, what I do is I usually just take water from my brush, drop in a few drops like that, let it sit for a minute so it softens it, and then I pick up the color and I use the palette. So the other paints I use, the Dr. P.H. Martin's, it's basically saving a step. So I like those. You have more color options with these. So if you're not comfortable with mixing colors, these are great to have because you just have like every color under the sun. If you're comfortable mixing colors, then go ahead and get the other ones and you can mix from there too. So today we're doing a pumpkin. All we're gonna be doing, I'm gonna turn this sideways, I'm gonna make this landscape, is we're gonna be doing kind of not a perfect circle, and draw really, really lightly because you want to be able to erase without having to, you know, like leave marks on your paper. And watercolor is really thin. So if you go too hard on your pencil, it'll show through the watercolor. So here's a really rough pumpkin shape, and you can do any pumpkin shape you want. If you're feeling a little bit more daring, then by all means do a different shape. Then what we're gonna do is I'm gonna add the stem. So I'm gonna make mine like those little curved stems. And notice I'm not putting it up here because the idea is that you're looking at it at kind of an angle. And I think when people start drawing, when you start basic drawing, you're kind of looking at everything and you see things 4-dimensional, but you draw them 2-dimensional. So we're gonna try to break that habit, and we're gonna start with this guy, with this pumpkin. So just do like a little curvy stem here, like that. Okay, and then it kind of goes out at the bottom. And then stems have, so pumpkins, remember pumpkins have these like, I don't know what they're called. Maybe you can leave in the comments and tell me what they're called. Like, they're not like apples and they're smooth. They're, you know, they got the grooves, but the grooves kind of go with the stem. So I'm gonna make my stem here, kind of like this. Doesn't have to be exact. It's organic, pumpkins aren't perfect. And then I want to just kind of, it's like a spider web effect, like that. And that's kind of going to be my guide for my pumpkin. So this little point here, I'm going to put and join to this point here. So I'm going to do just a really soft slope like that. And the same with this point in here. You kind of want to make them pretty even. And then the front one, you go the curves the other way, kind of like a clock. I'm gonna do this here. And then we're assuming we can see the points behind the stem, but we can't because it's behind the stem. And then just continue. And if you feel like you need to draw over the stem to see, you can do that too. So fake draw, and then you get to stem, and then you continue to draw. So like this is your center point, fake draw, and then draw your little thing like that. And I'm gonna do just one more because I feel like it's missing one right there. So there's your basic shape. Then we're just going to take these points from point to point and round it out. Like that. little bit bigger, that's okay. Like that. Then I'm going to erase the line that was first drawn. Like I said, watercolor is very thin, so the stuff shows through. And I'm just using, look, my pencil's a skeleton. I mean, I'm not using any fancy artist pencil, just regular school pencil. All right, now you have your basic pumpkin shape there. So now what we're gonna do is called wet drawing. And there's two types of watercolor paint. Wet drawing is when you start with water first, and dry painting, I said drawing, wet painting is when you start with water first and add the color. Dry painting is when you add the color with the paint straight to the paper. So we're going to do wet painting for the pumpkin and dry painting for the stem. And it'll make sense in a second. So I'm gonna get some oranges and I'm gonna do like this color is called gamboge. So I'm gonna do, it's like a mustard. And it's kind of already the color I like. So I'm not gonna do too much to change this. And I always have white on my palette. And then I'm gonna add a touch of my burnt umber. And that's kind of gonna be my base for my pumpkin. So I'm using my size 2 brush, and I'm gonna start and I'm gonna just wet this one section of the pumpkin. And if you have to kind of angle your paper to see if you're even doing it right, go ahead and do that. I'm used to it, so I'm just trusting that I'm getting the whole thing wet. And even if you miss some spots, okay. So make it nice and wet. Then I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna mix maybe. And then I'm gonna add the color and see how it spreads. That's a good thing. We want that to spread. And the reason you add water first is if you're looking for more of a lighter, less defined paint effect, this is really a nice way to do it. And the way watercolor works is you layer. It's the base layer. If you've ever done Photoshop, then you know it's layers and layers and layers, and that's kind of how you paint. So I just wet my brush. It's not clean, so when I add it to the next section, it's gonna show color. I'm okay with that. So I'm doing every other one because I want to give this guy a chance to dry. And then I'll go back and I'll fill in the other ones. And definitely cover the pencil line because you don't want to have that showing. I mean, some people do. So when I do my my home portraits, I actually will outline it with marker because I think it looks really cool. I think it looks better that way. And then I just add more of the mix I made. And this will dry really in a cool effect. Okay, the other one. And we're not doing photorealism here, so I'm not gonna worry about, I like the effect of watercolor pumpkins. I mean, you can do photorealism if you want. That's not what we're doing here. So it's definitely gonna look like watercolor and it's gonna look really cool. Okay. Just go around the stem. There we go. And then add my see how dark that is? I'm not worried about it. It's wet and I can spread the paint and it'll lighten up. See how I'm pushing the paint to the rest of the area? So I am not worried about how dark that came out. Watercolor is a very misunderstood medium. It's way more forgiving than people give it credit for. And I know with acrylic and oil, which I also paint in, yeah, you can go ahead and paint right over and nobody will be able to tell, right? But watercolor is quite forgiving. Now this has kind of a really cool, like a gesture kind of effect now. So now I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna do the rest of it. It's still wet, I'm okay with it. It's gonna spread a little bit into my paint. I'm totally fine with that. Like I said, this is a watercolor effect. I'm totally fine with that. It creates a really cool effect. What I'm really wanting to do separate is to keep these grooves separate, which is the reason why I did every other one. If your paint spreads more, that's fine. Just go with it. If you have to manipulate it more like I do, that's fine. If you go over your lines, that's fine. Okay. Finish all your other ones. Like that. Oops. Don't do what I did and get your hand on it, and then you get paint on your paper. I live in the desert, so it's very, very dry here. And you might see that my paint is drying much faster than probably yours. So you learn to adapt to the area you live in. And one more. Once you get the base done, then the fun part starts. Then we can start adding the shadows and the light. Okay, so there's your basic pumpkin. So now we're going to take a little bit of brown and oh, bummed my paper is not perfect now. That's okay. So now we're going to take a little bit of the brown and I'm going to water it down so it's a lighter brown. That's actually how you lighten things in watercolors, with water. And then I'm going to do a little bit just right here on the edge, because these are kind of your deep grooves where your shadows are. Okay, just like that. And then I'm gonna draw with my paintbrush and go down and just really lightly. You want to do what a lot of people do with their paintbrush is they move their wrist instead of their whole hand. And that's how you don't get straight lines. If you want straight lines, you move your whole hand together. So just like, and then I let the water kind of help move it along. So now I wet my brush and I'm just going alongside the brown. And that helps with making it blend. Kind of like that. Okay. And then just play with it to make it more smooth until you're comfortable with it. And if you're not liking your lines, it's just a practice thing. So just keep doing paintings until you're comfortable with the way you move with the brush. Just like that. Okay, we're going to do another layer. Just like that. And you notice that because of the way this paper is, it's starting to pull a little bit in one area. If you like the effect, keep it, of course. I'm just going to pick up some of the water so it doesn't do that, and then just go back over it. And that just happens because the water is and the paper is rippling. So if you use a more expensive paper when you feel comfortable, like Arches, it comes in a block and it stays attached to the pad. So you don't have that much of an issue, but it's much more expensive paper. So it's good to practice with these. And just keep going back and forth until you kind of feel like it's where you want it to be. Okay. I'm gonna let that dry just a little bit before I keep messing with it. You can also pick up the water with your brush. So I'm swooping it up, and then I dry it on my towel. And that's another way to do that. There we go. And then once that dries, I'll go back through and fix that a little bit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of a shadow while the rest of this dries. And the way to do a shadow is you take your black paint, you just need a tiny little drop like that. And then you're going to take water, add water to your palette. And you're going to take a little touch, like barely touch the black, right? Maybe a little bit more. And that's your, look at that. It's really, 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 really watered down color. That's it. It's super watered down. And then a shadow, we're going to assume, let's say the light's coming from this direction. So the shadow is going to be like this. I'm not going to touch the pumpkin, because if you touch the pumpkin, you risk the shadow, because it's still wet, you risk the color bleeding into that. I don't want that. So I'm just going to do, if you feel more comfortable sketching this out first, go ahead. So I'm just going to do a tiny little shadow like this. And notice I'm not touching the pumpkin, I'm leaving it a little bit a line there, because I don't want that to bleed in. And I can always fill that in later once it's completely dry. Okay. And that is it for the shadow. You can lighten it a little bit with water. Just like that. And then you kind of look at it and you're like, you know what? It needs a little bit more here. It doesn't look quite right. Just like that. And then just extend it out a little bit. Just like that. I mean, you can play with it a little bit. And then what I would do, once this is completely dry, is I'll actually go under and make this a lot darker, because the closer it is to the object, the darker the shadow is going to be, and then it kind of blends out. So now that the pumpkin's drying quite a bit, now I'm going to take a brown. I'm going to use my, you could do whatever brown you want. I'm going to do the sepia. Look at my palettes, all sorts of pretty fall colors. Now this is where we're going to do what I call dry painting. Your paintbrush is wet and pretty clean, right? I have a little bit of a yellow tone to it, but that's okay. Brown will overpower it. And then you're going to take your brown, and I didn't add water first. I'm just going to go straight down and paint my stem. Just like that. And if you want to pause this video and let your painting completely dry, go ahead. Just like that. There we go. It's getting there. So clean my brush again. Now I'm going to take a smaller brush, go back through, and I'm going to make these grooves a little deeper. And I'm going to do this. Now, remember, the most important thing you can do at this point of your painting is not compare it to mine. I find that this is the point where people start looking at my stuff and then looking at theirs. And if it's better, great, fantastic, I'm happy. But if it's not, or what you don't think is better, that's where you need to stop yourself and say, I am doing this for myself. I forgive my mistakes, and I'm gonna make them work. And I know it's hard to do, because I do that. I look at some of these photorealist artists, I'm like, oh my God, they deserve all the credit. But you know what? It doesn't matter. I'm just going to keep doing the shadow. It's getting better, more closer to where I want it to be. Then we're going to add some highlights, and then I'm going to darken right now. I'm going to darken the stem a little bit where I want it to be. So remember that line we drew? That's kind of what I want to come back. Just like that. And then I'm going to put a little bit of an end there. Just like that. And then I'm going to make this darker here, because I feel like that needs to be darker. Just like that. Okay. Then we're going to go back here. I'm going to add more shadow. So I'm actually going to take the black, not as super wet, and I'm going to do dry painting. I'm going to go underneath, just like that. And if you press your brush flat, it blends it a little bit better for you. You can see how it's solid black on the inside, but not on the outside. It's because I have my brush a little bit flatter. Just like that. See how that just made it look a little bit more deep? I'm gonna add a little bit more black here. A little bit more black here. And there we go. Okay, now for the highlight. So now make sure your brush is super clean. We're gonna take the white, we're gonna make the orange really light like this. I don't like adding straight white because it actually washes it out. And then we're just gonna do a little bit kind of on this side, like you don't wanna do all the way, more on the top because the light's shining. Remember the light's shining from this side? Just like that. Maybe a little bit right there because the light's right there. Just like that. And there's your pumpkin. And then just keep working it until you feel comfortable. Maybe take a step back. If you really want to add cool effects, take a little bit more black. Just a touch. And this is only if you feel comfortable, because this is where you can accidentally smudge black and be like, uh-oh. And just kind of go into the really deep grooves. And it really makes it look a little bit more dimensional. All about the shadow and the light. Just like that. And then most importantly, then you sign your name. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Please share your pictures with me. I'd love to see the finished product. And I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful Halloween.